Welcome back to another episode of Ayanmo Radio. It's your girl seventhsouljah, and we are back at it again, okay? And in today's episode, we are going to be getting into some very controversial topics that I'm actually excited for us to engage with because I think this theory that I have has been the root and the foundation of a lot of the diaspora wars. And I kind of put up a rough draft of this theory onto TikTok, and I got some feedback. Some people understood. Some people were like, "Girl, are you even Black American? I can't believe you said that." I provided a lot of nuance to the on text screen because, again, this theory was a rough draft, but I think it speaks to my need to put my thoughts out there, even in the event that others may not agree. But it did teach me a lesson to take my time when I am hashing out these theories that I have about culture, society, and identity because everybody is not going to get it. Um, in between last episode and this episode dropping, I have received a lot of positive feedback and love to be able to speak to my community about this episode and just having people be like, "Listen, get on your Zoom. We need your voice. Give me that." It has been making me root deeper in the fact that this space is indeed a communal space of collective thinking, and it will continue to be as we grow. So I want to thank everybody who is listening, thank everybody who is watching on YouTube. And yeah, y'all, I want to get into the tea because to me, it's indeed tea. If you have listened to the last episode, you're familiar with my work, you know I'm a very Pan-African person, right? And my identity as a Black American, African American, is rooted first in my identity as a person of African descent and a person of Native descent, right? So I identify heavily with being indigenous because I've taken time out to, one, decolonize the way that I think about my identity. And I have been given the opportunity and the privilege to go to a college at HBCU and to study under some really amazing scholars in Africana studies. So the way that I think about identity, culture, and society is very expanded, right, in that regard. And I'm grateful for it. But I have always, and I will continue to always be Pan-African in everything that I do, right? Because I think that Pan-Africanism has saved us and it will continue to save us. However, there has been some nuance and some things that I'm realizing amidst these diaspora wars that we really need to address. And it was hurting my feelings for quite some time, right? And I was very, I guess you could say, pessimistic about the state of Pan-Africanism because of these debates and conversations. But I think as a Black American, right, I have had to really take the time to listen to my people in a way that I don't think I have before as it relates to a lot of Black American disposition on these diaspora wars and what they have been experiencing, right? I'm not talking about the FBAs. I'm not talking about ADOS. I'm not talking about niggas who are committed to misunderstanding or denying the fact that they are of African ancestry. If you are committed on if you are committed on denying the fact that you indeed have African ancestry, my content is not for you. My content is for Pan-African niggas who actually want to push forward liberation, who actually want to push forward love, and who actually want to see the growth and the development of our people from a place of empowerment, knowledge, spirituality, right? Culture, all that other shit is not for you. Also, I'm not for any kind of nigga, any kind of African that does not embrace Pan-Africanism. Because just because you of African descent don't mean that you Pan-African. I'm not speaking to you niggas either. You niggas can go to hell. I don't give a damn. Why? Because you are a part of the problem. And I'm done addressing people who are committed to misunderstanding me and quite literally committing themselves to feeding the problems that dwell between the discourse amongst people of African descent. Straight like that. And I want to pull up this video that honestly led to a lot of this discourse, okay? So this creator's name is Deja, all right? And they do a lot of beauty content, specifically Black American beauty. That's what she states. And she made a video that said, where essentially are the Black American beauty creators? When she goes into different conferences and different spaces, she does not see Black American beauty creators, right? And it received about 200,000 views. It was a lot of different comments. And she said she would like to see Black American beauty creators dominate the space again. I think for me, language is important. So to say that you would like to see Black Americans dominate space, for me, when I seen the video, it just did not sit right with me. Now, if you want to watch the video, essentially you can follow this person at Deja.Zhane. Deja.Zhane. That's a very Black American name. Love that. But that's essentially what she said, right? And I was so irritated and tired. So even prior to me creating this video that received a lot of pushback, I was like, bro, when are we going to recognize that our labor is being exploited on a more grandiose scale across all different sectors of labor? And when are we going to get out of this need to dominate each other in spaces where, quite frankly, compared to white folk, whether you Caribbean, Nigerian, Americans from Zimbabwe, however you identify as a person of African descent, all of us are niggas and we are getting paid less than white folk. So quite literally, this idea of dominating space amidst a global market that disproportionately pays Black people, to me is nuts. It doesn't make sense, right? Because it's just like, can we get down to the root issues? Okay. But this conversation and her expressing her feelings led to some deeper revelations within the African diaspora and within these diaspora wars. Okay. And that was coupled, interestingly enough, with conversations around Black Americans experiencing historical erasure. There's a lot of Juneteenth discourse happening, and the ways that Juneteenth has been co-opted to some extent and made to be a Pan-African holiday instead of a holiday that represents and celebrates people of African descent in the United States specifically. And I think that's important because we all have culture that is significant to us, particularly as African people. But I find that for African Americans, in spite of being told by some folk that we don't have no culture, we lazy, we this, we that, we have holidays and traditions that even in this moment aren't being expressed as authentically in the foundations in which it was created. For example, Juneteenth, and it being a Texan holiday, the colors being red, white, and blue, but commercially they have been turned into Pan-African colors. And instead of it being a celebration and an ode to Black American history, we are not playing Black American music at Juneteenth celebrations. We are saying that this is a holiday that represents all African people all over the world. But if the shoe was on the other foot, quite frankly, and we went to another country and there was a specific holiday that celebrated the emancipation of another African country's people, and that tradition started to be essentially like morphed into a completely different theme, a completely different foundation, there will be issues, right? But for Black Americans, it's like, it's such a, what Juicy noted as a cultural porousness. And I think that based on what she said, that it does lead to resentment, because that's what she said. She said this cultural porousness leads to resentment. Because quite frankly, Black Americans have made and created a world. Shout out to my god brother Jay, because he stated this. He was like, Black Americans have created a world where everyone, especially if you are of African descent, can live and exist in comfortably, where you can indulge in our culture, cultural foods, cultural music, style, right? Musical genres. You can explore so much because Black Americans have literally created these worlds and quite literally shifted the trajectory of so many subcultures and genres all across the world. But I think that, and what a lot of Black Americans have been saying, I'm not talking about the ADOS niggas, I'm not talking about the FBA niggas, I'm talking about the Black Americans who are proud in their culture, who know their culture, who have been feeling disrespected. Folk have been upset because on one end we create spaces of safety for people of African descent in this country, and on the other end we get disrespected for not having culture or not being African enough or not being all of these things, when in actuality it isn't true. And I would like to add to the conversation that I don't think that it's just, continental Africans or Caribbeans who started this idea that African Americans have no culture. Just like I don't think that it was Black Americans who started this idea and this notion of the African booty scratch and all these different things. These ideas that we constantly fight over that relates to essentially the historical trauma that we inflict on each other goes back to colonization. And I think that we're starting to hate each other more than we hate colonization and what it's done to us. And granted, I think it's important that we hold ourselves accountable to the things that we say and how we function in space with each other, but I don't want us to lose the plot. And I think as a Pan-African who loves African diasporic people, whether it's in America, whether it's in Zimbabwe, Uganda, Ethiopia, Nigeria, wherever you from, Colombia, you know what I'm saying, Panama, Cuba, wherever you are from, I love you. I want to learn about you. I care because I know the world has taught us not to. But everybody don't think like that. Everybody doesn't have the capacity to hold space for that. Or we've been taught not to hold capacity or space for that when we travel. Okay. So what I want to really address is the fact that the wave of xenophobia that Black Americans have been experiencing on part of people that are continental African or Caribbean, or the xenophobia that Black Americans have been experiencing, or the xenophobia that African continental Africans and Caribbeans have been experiencing on light of Black Americans, it goes back to colonization. But I think the culture and the deeper issues that we need to address, right, it goes back to historical erasure. And listening, keeping my ear in the Black American streets, I'm hearing and I'm also assessing socially that it's not really Black Americans who are creating exclusionary culture or making people of African descent that are continental that migrated here, or Caribbean that migrated here, feel less than, per se. A lot of the times it's folk who have migrated here that don't know our culture that kind of address us with the xenophobia and disrespect us. Quite frankly, in our house and in our home, this place that we've made place. And one of my mutuals on TikTok was like, I'm so tired of us constantly fighting over, these what did he say? Let me actually go to it on TikTok. He said, and I agree with him, but at the same time, I'm realizing, especially as a hoodoo, the importance of us not disregarding the history of our ancestors who dwelled in particular lands. I just don't think that we can just disregard that. So he said people are obsessed, Samadu, he said people are obsessed with this idea of individual place-based plantations, and they can't see the transatlantic slave trade as what it really became. One big plantation that African descended people still live on, okay? And it's tea. It's tea. Don't get me wrong, it's tea. However, I think that it would be tone deaf to say and ignore the culture and the legacies that people of African descent have built on these lands and on these, place-based plantations, and say it doesn't matter, right? Nobody cares, because it's become our home for generations, and we have built relationships with the land and with the place. And I think that one of the beautiful one of the beautiful things of being human, being a scholar, being an intellectual, is that your ideas constantly evolve, and involve you interrogating them and taking them to a deeper level as you learn, as you listen, as you pay attention. And as I reflected on the landscape, right, I also had to reflect on my experience as a Black American. And a couple months back during Black History Month, I made a post that was like, yo, I feel like when Black Americans are in space, right, I don't feel like we kind of big up our heritage enough. Like, we kind of get meek and small when people are like, oh yeah, I'm from Nigeria, I'm from Ghana, I'm from this, I'm from that. We kind of get like, oh, I'm from South Carolina. And we kind of make it seem like it's less than what it actually is, when regardless of where you from, you have a deep history of African resistance, culture, and liberation there. The issue comes in, and I'm talking to Black Americans at this point. A lot of us have a low national pride. And it's because of a lack of education surrounding African American history that we kind of dwell in that. And because of the cultural porousness and how African diaspora, quite frankly, it means to be a Black American is, we fall short of being prideful and learning and studying the traditions of our culture. But that issue of not studying the ins and outs of our culture isn't something that Black Americans exclusively go through. Because I've had homies from Cote d'Ivoire, from all over the continent, that's like, oh yeah, like, y'all Black Americans know more African history and understandings of culture than some folk who are continental African and had parents who migrated here, right? Because granted, Black Americans to some extent couldn't name a African dish, traditionally cultural dish that comes from the continent and say, oh, I know how to make this dish. But if you look and you study African American culture, you recognize and you understand that it is a continuity of Africana people. But the issue with a lot of people who are of African descent who migrate to the U.S. is that they don't see it, right? They don't get taught it. They don't know it. And some Black Americans don't see it, don't get taught it, or know it either. So I think this conversation around, Black Americans not having culture and us moving into a space of cultural pride is a beautiful call for us to study and dive deeper in what the legacy of being Black American is. And for the folk who are in solidarity and who engage in Black American culture and who love Black American culture, right? I think it's a charge to do the same. I also think it's a charge to not fall into xenophobic ideas or ways of thinking because of this discussion and because of what's happening, because I personally think that the white man wins. I went to a cookout and we had this conversation, and a beautiful Black American sister of mine was like, yeah, I'm not about to teach nobody about my culture that don't give a damn to learn it or just straight up disrespect me. However, I'm thinking about if I was to go to Ghana, right, today or tomorrow, and granted, just think about this real quick, because this is something that came up. If I was to go to Ghana and I was to stay in Ghana for some time, I migrate to Ghana, and I was to be like, Ghanaians don't really have culture for real. Like, I feel like y'all culture is honestly like a derivative of just like French culture, and y'all just are super like colonized in that way. Whatever. It would be a Ghanaian who would educate me and be like, actually, boo, no, that's not the reality. That's what they tell you, but the T is ah. Do you get what I'm saying? And I think that we have a duty as people of African descent, we have a duty, we have a duty as people of African descent, no matter where we come from, to educate people of African descent, no matter where we come from, on the culture, the customs, traditions, and the legacies of our people. But we also, as people of African descent, if we actually love each other and respect each other's culture, have a duty to always function in a spirit of respect, curiosity, and seeking to know, especially when we migrate to somebody's land or place, right? And made place there. I think that that's just basic non-xenophobic ways of living and being, and quite literally non-colonial ways of living and being. Because if I was to go to Ghana and say, oh yeah, you don't have no culture, all your culture is influenced by the French, whose mentality am I taking on? A colonial one. But if I was to function from an indigenous perspective, no matter where I travel, guess what I'm going to seek to do? I'm going to seek to understand the culture of that said people. So no matter where you from in the U.S., I don't care if you have a flag or you know where you people come from, whatever the case may be. You can still not know where your people come from or your history. And I think that's the thing that kind of separates or creates not just resentment, but a little bit of an identity wound for Black Americans, is that we don't have a flag. Granted, people are talking about this Black American heritage flag. I didn't know about that flag till a couple years ago. I didn't grow up having that flag around my house. I grew up with the the Pan-African flag, but nothing that was specifically giving an ode to Black American culture, legacy, and struggle. And it's not an emoji. You know what I'm saying? So I'm actually not mad anymore when people say that Black Americans are experiencing historical erasure at all, because quite frankly, we are. We're in the belly of the beast, where European folk who run this system have done an amazing job of making sure that our legacy of resistance, our culture, our continuity of African culture was quite frankly pushed under the rug. But what they seek to push out is the materialism, the hypersexualization, the violence that their circumstances created for us. And granted, while though it makes good music, okay, it makes good aesthetics, it makes fly shit, it doesn't speak to the soul of who we are. And it's so funny because I've learned in this process, right, that the name and one of the names in which Black Americans have been coined to take on is Solan, because we are soulful people. And we are. We are. We are so soulful. And I think that with the love that we have, with the cultural resistance that we have, with the solidarity that we have always had with people of African descent all over the world, I think we deserve to have people take a closer look at our culture and seek to understand it and celebrate it, not from a place of extraction or consumption, but from a place of respect, love, and understanding and compassion. So, I think it's truly important for us to, at the end of the day, lean back into Pan-Africanism and recognize that a lot of the diaspora wars that we are seeing is truly a result of historical trauma that's been placed on us through European colonization and world domination. And that is what leads to the identity wounds that we see playing out across the diaspora, even if Black Americans are not included in a conversation, because diaspora wars happen between folk who are just of Caribbean descent too. Black Americans ain't the ones that start in diaspora wars. No, diaspora wars happen in countries and between countries all across the world. But guess what? Because of that, there are identity wounds that are created where someone feels they are inferior and superior. And I'm going to give you an example. The Hutsi and the Tutsi in Rwanda. This is a great example of how European colonization took a people who were the same. Okay? Quite literally, the same tribe, different features. Igbo, Yoruba. Okay? Yoruba, sorry. The Rwanda genocide and what happened there is a prime example, because the Hutsi and the Tutsi were the same people, and they went and said that because your features are this way, you're better, and because your features are that way, you're worse. So guess what happened? For years, Hutsi and Tutsis, who are of the same tribe, were literally fighting each other and killing each other to the point of a genocide amongst people. And guess who came in after the fact? After they tainted them with European ideology, okay, and European pseudoscience, they came and they said that they were trying to help and make peace, i.e. the UN, United Nations. When the same people who created that is the same people who created the ideologies that created the genocide to begin with, right? So at what point do we recognize and start to become irritated with European cultural thought and colonial thought as it relates to these diaspora wars and not each other? Granted, accountability is important. But again, let's not lose the plot in trying to blame somebody for saying this or doing that, when the reason why we don't know about each other and we're not educated about each other is because of a European system that taught all of us ain't worth shit and don't have nothing to know. And quite literally, if you are of African descent, Black American, Jamaican, wherever you come from, we all went through a process where we had indigenous practices, but in order to become more successful, more fluent, more how can I say this? Economically stable, we had to leave behind some of our cultural thoughts and ideas and ways of being. We had to let that gullah talk go, because you talk too Geechee. You too geeky. To be African and to have an African dialect was to be seen as inferior. So some people left it behind. They thought it was a bunch of hoopla. And again, Black Americans were not the only ones who left that behind. There are Yoruba, Igbo, and I'm saying, y'all know Nigerians are deep. You ain't going, Juicy said this, you ain't going to go nowhere in the world and not find a Nigerian. Okay? You're not. That's just quite frank. We got to keep it a bean. But do you get what I'm saying? It's like there are some cultural things that folk of Yoruba descent or Igbo descent, they left behind because, oh, that's you a witch, you this, you that. Every person of African descent goes through a process of having to culturally assimilate. To sit up here and say that Black Americans are the only ones that do not have culture or assimilated, it doesn't make sense. We all went through it. And to another creator's point, all of us, quite frankly, were dropped off in these new lands 400 years ago too. Whether it's Jamaica, Brazil, US, all of us was enslaved and got dropped off on these lands around the same time. So we are not better than each other. We just need to seek to understand each other and leave that xenophobic and colonial thought behind. Because that's what we're acting out on each other. That's what we're acting out on each other. That's it. And when you listen to this episode, I need you to understand that. And if you a person of African descent and you think you better than me because you come from the Caribbean or fuck you. Quite frankly, and I hope you carry the same mentality towards somebody who is of another nationality who thinks the same about you. Because guess what? That means that you are of colonial thought and you liable to sell me out and another African brother who from the Caribbean, who's Yoruba, who's Ugandan, who's Pan-African as well, who from Burkina Faso. And that's not me being xenophobic. That's me being fucking real. And that's y'all issue. Y'all don't know how to understand the nuance in conversation. It's like y'all either are xenophobic and talking shit and y'all not really critically thinking about what's causing us to be in discourse. Again, y'all hate each other more than you hate the European cultural thought that taught you to hate your brother and not give a damn about their history to begin with. Your issue is my issue. And we are not better than each other. Even though we may ebb and flow between feeling superior or inferior in our identity. For whatever reason. And I also said that in that post. I've had an experience where someone of Jamaican ancestry dated someone in my family and made an assumption that we were calling them abusive and all this other stuff because they off the strength that they were Jamaican. Me being a Pan-African, I was like, I don't know where this is coming from, but this seems like projection. But guess what that was? A identity wound that probably made them feel inferior because they were a migrant to the U.S., right? Turned superior. Already complex. It's y'all, I guess for me it's like this. If you know my mother taught me this. When you know yourself, nobody can tell you shit about the things that you know about you. Quite frankly, they can't. So I think we need to know ourselves. I think we need to know our wounds. I think we need to know what is causing us pain, what is causing us mental anguish, what systems are in place at this point in time that are causing us to have these wars with each other. And I think discourse is important. So as much as, right, I'm like, the diaspora wars are tiring. As much as I'm like, these diaspora wars are tiring, I'm also realizing that they can and they will be a bridge of solidarity and union between and within the identities of people of African descent in general. Like in this case, right? These diaspora wars and these instances where some Black Americans feel like they've been bullied for not having any culture, that's pushing a lot of Black Americans to have a very clear understanding of their culture and to study their culture, right? Just like with anybody else. I think that's necessary. I think it's necessary for us to start to respect ourselves because, again, like I said earlier in the episode, there have been times where we have just felt meek and small. We haven't really put respect on our own culture, right? So, like, you actually can't, and it's like, not to say you can't be mad, but again, when you think about Nigerians have a unwavering pride in who they are because that's just how they've been taught to be culturally. I think it's time for Black Americans to have that same energy. It is. So the things that this diaspora war is bringing up, I think it's for a reason. And I don't think that it should go to waste. And I think that not only are Black Americans learning from this, but also people who are engaging in this conversation, who are hearing this too, and who may not know a lot about Black American culture but may consume it. And the folk that do and who love it and respect it and value the culture, their friendships that they have with people. And I would love for you to act as like an ally in some of these conversations too. And for the folk who also are non-xenophobic and don't let this online discourse push you to fall into these xenophobic patterns, again, engage in the discourse. Engage in it. Talk about some things that came up in this episode. Push people to seek to understand and block niggas who seek to misunderstand. You're a lost cause. You're not for the revolution. I don't need you here. Delete. Point blank fucking period at this point. I'm not trying to explain myself to niggas that are committed to misunderstanding me. You have no space here. You don't. But to my niggas who like to critically think and collectively think, blowing you a kiss. Blowing you a kiss to my people of African descent from the Caribbean, from the continent, from the U.S. I love y'all. I love y'all. And it's no need for us to be fighting like this. However, I do think it's important for us to understand where we're coming from. And I can only speak from the perspective of a Black American who's also Pan-African, who hates xenophobic thought, but sees and seeks to understand the realities that my people is facing, you know? And who wants to deal with the nuance. That's what I'm here to do. I'm here to deal with the nuance. And I also want to speak to the fact that I'm not always going to be right. Okay? And we all have situations and things that come up, but this space is not about me being right or wrong. It's about me thinking. And when I think about writers like W.B. Du Bois, Malcolm X, Dr. Martin Luther King, Bell Hooks, Claudia Jones, Sylvia Wynter, Toni Morrison, Zora Neale Hurston, I'm pretty sure that there were times where the ideas and the theories that they conjured, that they wrote about, they evolved. So allow me to evolve. I love y'all for seeing me and allowing me to evolve and for listening. So shout out to you listening. I want to know your thoughts. So if you're listening on Spotify, you can comment your thoughts. If you're listening on YouTube, I want you to comment your thoughts. If you see a clip on Instagram, I want you to comment your thoughts, okay? And if you are listening to this and you didn't go to see my Instagram or TikTok, I think you should go check it out and engage with my clips because, boosting, engagement, all that stuff. And, yeah, I love y'all. I appreciate y'all. And I hope y'all enjoyed this episode from your favorite Black American princess. Your favorite Afro-Indigenous princess. Seventh Soldier. See y'all soon.